35 years of killing God. Sounds like a really hard Dark Souls boss.
Put your weapons away.
Today we are finally ranking the albums of death metal legends DEICIDE, and we're starting with DEICIDE in 1990. One of the best-selling death metal albums of all time, very raw with that classic 90s death metal sound, also highly lauded, considered a classic and foundational album in the genre. I love how those breathy snarls towards the end of Lunatic of God's Creation legitimately sound like a boar preparing to charge. Oblivious to Evil is a real head bobber, the title track is packed with great riffs and the perfect band anthem. Also love the Evil Dead reference and demon vocal effects on Dead by Dawn, and both Blastferion and Mephistopheles are insane. Incredible debut at a time where death metal was still really just getting started. One of my favorites of this year as well. It is going to perfection. Then we have Legion in 1992. The band considers this album to be its most difficult in its technicality, and it definitely sounds more chaotic right from the beginning with Satan's Spawn. I can even hear elements of this album that were likely an inspiration to mathcore bands later on in the same decade. Despite the chaos though, it's a tight album at just 8 tracks over 29 minutes. Dead But Dreaming is strangely hypnotic. Trifixion fucking shreds. Revocate the Agitator is pummeling. Maybe not as strong as the debut. I think the vocals in particular fall a little bit short, but still among my favorites easily. They're very close. I do kind of go back and forth on them depending on the day, but it is going to perfection as well. Then we have Once Upon the Cross in 1995. Steve Asheim mentioned in an interview that the songs are slower here because when they recorded at the normal pace, they only ended up with 22 minutes of material. So they re-recorded them at a lighter pace to get to the 30-minute mark. And they do play these songs faster live. I always find that a funny story and also notable after the last album. This one does feel just a little bit slower. But I appreciate the increased infectiousness of the groove in the opening title track and Christ Denied. Both have some pretty anthemic vocal lines. They Are the Children of the Underworld also rarely fails to get me banging my head and doing the stank face. That said, I'm not as big a fan of the vocal performance on this one overall, and I would honestly like to hear a version at the faster speed. Somebody in the comments said they just turned up the speed to like 1.5 while they were listening to it, but I'm like, man, the vocals must sound crazy. Yeah, I also don't like this one quite as much from start to finish too, which is how I always rate an album. It's not just about like, oh, it's got this great song or even like 4 great songs. The whole thing has to be good. And so still popular for a reason, but for me, I put it at amazing. Then we got Serpents of Light in 1997.
He fucked himself to save you.
Hearing a slight shift in production with this one, it's almost kind of Slayer sounding. Plenty more standards here. Serpents of Light kicking things off on a strong note. Bastard of Christ is another top 10 track for me. Also enjoy This Is Hell We're In, Slave to the Cross, and Creatures of Habit. Alternatively, I once more think that the vocals could be more varied and the runtime more consistent, with some tracks starting around I Am No One that are still good, but just maybe not as good. So this one also landed at amazing, great album, love re-listening to it, but there are some I like even more. Yo, we have plenty more videos to go, but as always, if you're enjoying it so far, be sure to hit the like button and also comment below your rankings. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Let's get a conversation going respectfully, please. Then we have Insineratehymn in 2000. The first real misstep from this Florida band after a pretty strong 4-album run, if you ask me. It feels very stripped back and dumbed down, right down to the cover art. Frankly, it looks and often feels more like a 6 Feet Under album to me, though it's probably at least slightly better than that. In fact, I don't think they really truly have a, like, bad album. So yeah, not awful, just kind of dull and sometimes even cringe, and that doesn't even seem to be an unpopular opinion, as this is the second lowest rated album from them, both on Metal Storm and Metal Archives. Bible Basher is the only song to regularly make it into their live set, and I do enjoy that song, but yeah, this is going to okay.
You blew it!
Then we have In Torment in Hell in 2001. Highly criticized for being rushed and not meeting songwriting standards, Steve Asheim again saying that they were burnt out on each other at this point, and rarely are any of these songs played live either. Kind of lame, but I feel like it's better than the last one in some level in terms of the instrumentation. Kind of feels like a lower tier Cannibal Corpse album. Honestly, it's not that bad in comparison to some truly awful death metal that I've heard from this era and even from 2001. Again, I don't think they have a terrible album, but this is one of their worst, so this is also going to okay. Then we got Scars of the Crucifix in 2004. This one has their first music video for the admittedly catchy as hell title track. Fuck Your God was also reportedly used as a torture method in Iraq to induce sleep deprivation, which is both absolutely detestable but kind of metal as fuck in a really, really disturbing way. Outside of that, things get fairly generic sounding, though the layering of highs and lows on the vocals sounds pretty demented in places. Very little sticks with me, but like every album, it has its moments. The title track has almost a Fear Factory sounding riff. The insane pounding of the drums on Enchanted Nightmare is great. Go Now Your Lord Is Dead has a lot of those layered vocals again. Final album to have the original full lineup too. This one is going to good tier. Then we have the Stench of Redemption in 2006. Aptly titled as this album was hailed as a return to form by critics, and especially after those last few, I tend to agree. Featuring Jack Owen of Cannibal Corpse and 6 Feet Under, and Ralph Santola of Iced Earth. Another pretty evident production shift, this time more in line with modern stuff, kind of like Dying Fetus, and with vocals sounding even more brutal in a very Corpse Grinder sounding belted style. A little more emphasis on melody sometimes too, right from the start on the title track, woven nicely into the still super pummeling stuff. Everything just sounds tighter, heavier, and more engaging, with compositions that also just feel on a grander scale, like Desecration and the Lords of Sedition. Excellent soloing too. Crucified for the Innocents is a fucking rager. Homage for Satan has Vader vibes and is also just pure evil sounding. This one also went to perfection. Then we got Till Death Do Us Part in 2008. Back to kind of a bland note on this one. It was kind of a buzzkill to hear them hit their stride again so well on that last album and then just stumble back into mediocrity on this one. This is also their longest album to date at 42 minutes, and unfortunately those extra minutes are just not justified. It's not bad. In fact, if it had come out after Serpents of the Light, I think I probably would have liked it more since it feels more aligned with that era to me. But just a very meat and potatoes death metal album, to quote the Metal Meltdown, with a few standout moments but not a lot of truly great songs. It can also get quite doomy at times, which just is not what I come to DEICIDE for, so this also went to good tier. Then we got to Hell with God in 2011. Back to the good with this one. The opening title track and Savior make for one of the most punishing first few minutes of an album of theirs to date, I would say. Conviction is another clear standout with its more mid-pace South of Heaven approach to headbanging. Hang in Agony Until You're Dead has some really awesome dynamic changes. Witness to Death is another ripper. I also go nuts for the crazy infectious hook on Embark Blasphemy. I could go on, but suffice it to say that this is really just another great start to finish listen, fast, ferocious. What more could you want? It is going to fantastic. Then we got In the Minds of Evil in 2023. Asheim said he performed this album with a blown-out shoulder and that it was mostly improvised, but that said, he still absolutely killed it, and I agree with Mad Mike in saying that he's an underrated drummer in general. It's another strong later career album, though without as much of the more modern flashiness. It feels like another attempt to connect back to their roots, but much more successful than Till Death, I would say. No bad tracks, but definitely some standout bangers in Thou Be Gone, God Kill, In the Minds of Evil, Trample the Cross, Fall into Silence, and that incredible build on Even the Gods Can Bleed. I also love how thrashy some of these riffs get, and Glenn sounds absolutely rabid on some of these songs as well. This one is also going to fantastic. Then we got Overtures of Blasphemy in 2018. Now, if it says anything on going back through these albums, I discovered that I already had this album in my iTunes with all of the tracks rated, yet I had no memory of even listening to it. That said, on this latest revisit, it's not bad at all. It just, once more, doesn't hit the heights of their early albums or the Stench of Redemption. A few standouts here, with Seal the Tomb below, again hitting some of that Vader energy. Love those melodic leads and groovy chugging on Anointed in Blood. Banger opener too in One with Satan, followed strong by Crawled from the Shadows. Outside of that, there are also plenty of tracks that feel like they should be sufficiently fast and heavy enough to get me moving, but just don't hit for whatever reason, especially in the final third, until ending on a strong note with Destined to Blasphemy. I'd say this one is a step down from the last one, but still enjoyable. It is going to great tier. Which brings us to Banished in Sin in 2024. Coming in strong and super heavy with From Unknown Heights You Shall Fall, great riffs and energy, sticking to that old 90s no frills mentality. This followed up by the slower but no less infectious grooves of Doomed to Die. I also dig the D beats of Faithless and Woke from God, which never failed to get my feet tapping. Ritual Defied, A Trinity of None, and I Am I, A Curse of Death are full speed rippers, great catchy bounce to the title track as well. A lot of my favorite moments are again where they layer the deep throaty growls with the higher shrieks for more unhinged effect. Now on the flip side, I'm not connecting as much with Sever the Tongue, and honestly I find the vocal cadence on the verses of Bury the Cross to be kind of annoying and repetitive. So yeah, I definitely think that there are far more single-worthy songs here, so it was interesting that those two were the choices when I didn't really vibe with them as much. Ultimately, it's a fun, heavy listen, but at the same time, I'm not overly impressed with it either, and while I appreciate that they were trying to avoid over-compression in the recording and mixing process, the production feels a little bit stark and flat to me. So yeah, pretty middle of the pack here, and I'd say that's also the case when it comes to the scope of death metal albums this year. Like, there's been some amazing stuff coming out in 2024 that I could go on and on about, and I will at the end of the year, so subscribe if you're new here and wait for that. But I also put out videos twice a week. As for this one though, this album is going to great tier. Y'all check out this playlist for more death metal tier lists, or also this video for whatever YouTube wants to recommend to you specifically. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.